Welcome into Sideline Signal. I'm Andrew, joined as always by my co-host Tyler. We had another great week of NFL and college football, so we're going to go in and get our two takeaways from the NFL week, our college stock market predictions, as well as our teams from the NFL that impressed and disappointed. How are you doing today, Tyler?
I am great. The Mets just caught a playoff win. I know that's not football, but it's got me excited. And what can you say about this past weekend of college football? And then the NFL had some great games as well. I'm ready to talk about it. Can't wait to get into it.
Definitely, it was a week that certainly did not disappoint. So, starting off, give me your first takeaway from this NFL week.
Okay, so I want to preface this, Jets fans. This is not at you. Okay, this is not at you, but it's the Jets. The Jets need to be held accountable, and it starts from the top to the bottom. We got to start with Robert Saleh, Nathaniel Hackett as the OC, and then Aaron Rodgers as well. Everyone needs to be held accountable in this kind of organization right now. So the Jets have had a very up and down start to the season. They got waxed by the Niners in week one. The score was a lot closer than the game, in my opinion. They followed that up with a late game-winning touchdown drive against the Tennessee Titans. Then they washed the Pats on Thursday night, and then they ended up putting out a stinker, a real stinker, losing to the Broncos 10-9 this past Sunday. Bo Nix had -7 passing yards at half. The only receiver that got above 10 yards the entire game on the Broncos was Cortland Sutton, and they still won the game. That is embarrassing. For a team that's expectations is to go deep into the playoffs, possibly win a Super Bowl, that is no excuse for that. So just starting there. So one thing that I've seen week to week, and it's not just this past week, is the fact that Robert Saleh consistently gets out coached by every single coach, even in games that they win. It seems like, take a timeout here, kick a field goal here, go for it here. Just certain play calls. Even I assume that he has his hands in on the defensive side as well. Although Jeff Ulbricht's been doing a pretty good job as the D coordinator there, but Robert Saleh, man, we give him excuses every single year. Last year was, oh, Aaron Rodgers is hurt. The year before that, oh, they don't have the weapons. The year before that, oh, we still don't have the weapons. We're rebuilding. Well, guys, this is the finished product. This is the rebuilt team. You got Aaron Rodgers. You got the great defense. You have the weapons. Where is the coaching? You expect the coaching to rise to the challenge for a team like this. And I feel like he's too busy just stroking Aaron Rodgers' ego on the sideline or just in general to really pay attention to the game. And his coaching decisions kind of show it. Nathaniel Hackett, outcoached by the defensive coordinator in Denver this past weekend. Terrible play calls. And it's so simple for him because Aaron Rodgers basically calls his own plays as it is. So you kind of just got to put your players in the right positions there. And then late in the game in Denver, this is from a team standpoint, there were multiple miscommunications on that final series of plays that ended up to where they had to take that field goal where Greg Zuerlein missed. There was one to Mike Williams and one to Garrett Wilson. Clearly not on the same page, and that's not something that you usually see. And I hate to mention it because this is not related, and I had no problem with this. But if you're going to miss mandatory minicamp, you can't have stuff like this happening. And I know it's not training camp and it's not like you got the pads on, it's not real practices, but these are reps that you could have had with these guys, not specifically Mike Williams, but Garrett Wilson in general. And you decided to go on an ayahuasca trip in the desert and you weren't even shy about it. You flat out told the media that. So that's a little embarrassing on your part, Aaron Rodgers. I feel like Jets fans are treating him like he won all those MVPs and Super Bowl in New York, where, in all honesty, he hasn't done anything to deserve really that much praise besides Thursday night. So what I want to see from the Jets, it's still early. It's an uber talented team. They still, this is fixable. By no means is a week four loss to the Broncos unraveling the season. I want to see them hold Aaron Rodgers accountable. I feel like he's been more like a celebrity than a quarterback. Obviously, you heard the back and forth between Saul and him in the press conferences about the cadence. And Aaron Rodgers is right. 5, 6 false starts are not acceptable. But Saleh is your head coach. Do you think Pat Mahomes is talking to Andy Reid like that? Or even mention him like that? I doubt it. It's about respect. So that's kind of where I'm coming from with this. So yeah, the Jets need to be held accountable at all levels here moving forward because there is no time for this Hollywood BS that they're kind of running right now, where Aaron Rodgers is the ringleader. That's got to stop. You're 2-2. You should be 3-1, possibly 4-0. I'm not going to sit here and say that they should have beaten the Niners, but those other three games are all winnable games that you should have won. So we're sitting there. So they're a game back on where they should have been. But yeah, that's my first takeaway. So the Jets need to be held accountable. Andrew, what was your first takeaway of the week?
Yeah, definitely. And before I go into that, I completely agree. I think there's been a lot of distractions around the Jets ever since Rodgers came in. And especially this offseason, they've just constantly been surrounded by off the field things. And they really need to focus and figure out what they want to achieve with this team because they definitely have the chance to win this division. It's kind of wide open. But yeah, disappointing loss. I'll get into it a little bit later. But to start, my first key takeaway was due to a little bit of breaking news that came out today. The Raiders are looking to rebuild. And obviously, it's off an interesting win to the Cleveland Browns this weekend. But a little earlier in today, we're recording it Tuesday night. Devontae Adams came out and asked the Raiders to trade him. He would like to be traded, and the Raiders came out and said that they're currently shopping him. They want some prospects and potentially a second round pick as well. Like I said, the Raiders are 2-2 to start the season. Um, but they don't look like they're going to be a playoff team this year. And with how many gaps they have in this team on offense and defense, getting rid of Devontae Adams seems likely. And it looks like they're going to start another early rebuild, which is very unfortunate. Obviously, being a Raiders fan, I don't think we've had the best time with Devontae Adams, but obviously it wasn't his fault. His first year, with the playoffs last year of Derek Carr. But unfortunately, it's the way it goes. And in my opinion, I've said this for a while. I'm not really surprised by this. Devontae Adams is too good to be on a team that won't make the playoffs. And obviously, there's plenty of teams that are currently out to try and trade for him. Jets are a big team. Commanders' name's been thrown out. I think it was the Ravens as well. So a lot of teams looking to get him. Very disappointing for me, especially because it's technically not tank mode yet this early in the season, but it kind of shows how they're looking to kind of start a new chapter under Antonio Pierce.
Yeah, and it is definitely concerning that something like this is happening this early in the year. So I have two questions for you before we
Yeah.
move on to my second takeaway. Do you think the situation would be different if Aiden O'Connell was the starter from the beginning? Because I know that he liked him. That's my first question. So yeah.
I don't know because to be honest, Gardner Minshew hasn't been awful. I don't think a lot of the blame falls on him for why the offense has been mediocre because going into week 3, he was second in passing yards in the NFL. So I wouldn't put a lot of blame on Gardner to Aiden O'Connell. I mean, I will say O'Connell had a solid season in the time he played last season, and then his few drives that he had in garbage time last week in the loss, to the Panthers, it looked good. So. But I don't necessarily think that having Aiden O'Connell in would have been that drastic of a change. I think the offensive line has been lackluster again. Colton Miller is really kind of the only real stud on that offensive line, and then JPJ, the rookie from Oregon at center, has been injured, so we haven't seen a lot out of him yet. So I think just overall, it's been mediocre. The run game outside of Alexander Madison, Zamir White's done almost nothing for us. So yeah, I still think Devontae would request a trade if Aiden O'Connell was the starting quarterback, and I still wouldn't be surprised if we were 2-2 if he would have started all 4 games.
So then the second question here is if you had to pick one by the end of the season, which team is Devontae Adams playing for? You can say the Raiders if you don't think a deal gets done.
Uh,
But
no, ultimately, I think a deal will get done because I think as the stretch of the season will progress, once we get closer and closer to the deadline, I think the Raiders will continuously lose and get to a point where it's unrealistic that we'll make a wild card spot. But as to who he could go to, I mean, that's difficult. There's plenty of teams that are going to be shopping. Our friend Chris today was like, could you imagine if he goes to the Chiefs? I said that with Jet
never.
Moss at the beginning of the season and got a lot of hate. I don't think he'll go to the Chiefs. I don't think the Raiders will trade in division. I mean, the favorite has always been the Jets to get that connection back with Aaron Rodgers. I don't know if they'll get that done with, the current, roster that they have. They have a lot of mouths already to feed on that offense. So like who are you going to trade? Alan Lazard, Garrett Wilson?
Yeah, yeah.
Honestly, I would like to see him in Baltimore. I think that would be a really, really interesting take because they have, the run game with both Lamar's ability to run as a quarterback and Derrick Henry. But the biggest stain on Lamar's career is he's never really had a powerhouse at receiver. And I would argue that he still doesn't. I think Isaiah Likely's probably been their most
Yeah.
beneficial receiver outside of maybe Zay Flowers, who's, good and young. But if they could get a true wide receiver one in Baltimore, that offense would look scary. And honestly, that would be a fun team to watch.
Yeah, it really would. And the one thing I'll say about that is while it would be cool, I can definitely see him going to a place like that and then wanting out after that season. Because the way the Ravens offense is structured, and that's in part because they don't have a star wide receiver, is that, like even a guy like Zay Flowers, who's their wide receiver one right now, he's not putting up huge numbers. So I wonder if that would change if they got him. Obviously, would have to. But if I had to pick, I mean, if I could pick a team that I want him to go to the Packers. I think if he went
Ooh,
back to Green Bay with Jordan Love
that
and
would
that young receiving core, that would be ridiculous.
which would be a really interesting shout considering Christian Watson just got carted off this weekend
Yes.
game against Minnesota. That'd be a fun team to watch.
I mean, it would help out my Super Bowl prediction, that's for sure. But yeah, so that'll be interesting. It'll be a lot of drama. I'm sure we'll cover this as the weeks come by. Obviously, sorry for the Raiders, but like you said, it is what it is. I feel for you, except we didn't trade our star player; he just left. But it's all right. It is what it is at this point, from the business end of things. So moving on to my second takeaway, and this is one that hurts me right in the fantasy team, and that is Kyle Pitts is cooked. He is cooked. He is a bust. 100% now, no doubt in my mind. Zero catches, 0 yards. I mean, they scored 26 points and won the game over the Saints. A pretty big game for the Falcons early on in the year. The former top 10 pick has been nothing short of horrid in his first couple of years in the league. He's got 157 catches, 2,154 receiving yards, and 7 touchdowns. Now you might be looking at that like, oh, okay, that's not really not that bad. But it is for someone that is projected to be the number one weapon, like a comparison to like a Tony Gonzalez type guy for the Falcons that's supposed to be that safety blanket. And they didn't need him. They didn't even need him. They didn't need him at all. It didn't look like they were lacking that explosiveness. They have Bijan Robinson. Tyler Algier is a great spell for Bijan, like the power to the speed kind of combo in the backfield. And Drake London's been balling as well as like Darnell Mooney. Ray McLeod's been stepping in as that third wide receiver. So they don't need him. He's not getting targets. This is bad. This is really bad for Kyle Pitts himself. Obviously, he's getting a paycheck, but I'm sure it's frustrating. And then for fantasy owners, he's like dead in the water, in my opinion. I would trade him, but I don't think anyone would accept the trade at this point unless he went off this weekend. But I just wanted to pull up this stat, and it's kind of a strange stat, but Kyle Pitts' yards per route run in the NFL. Ready? So this is going to be surprising to you, Andrew. I promise you. His rookie year, 2021, 2.02 yards per route. 2022, 1.69 yards per route. 2023, 1.43 yards per route. 2024, you want to guess if it went lower or higher?
Probably lower.
Yeah, lower. 1.06. What are we doing? He's a franchise tight end, or that's what he's supposed to be. Uh, I don't really have much other words than that. That's just terrible.
Yeah, and
One yard?
Yeah, and I
Really?
remember like when he was coming out of the draft, he was touted as one of the generational tight ends, like one of the best tight end prospects we'd ever watch. And Arthur Smith, when he was in Atlanta, never used him. And you'd think it'd get better now that he's gone, but I mean, according to the stats, I mean, this is just pathetic.
Yeah. Yeah, it's pathetic. And I could easily see him having like 10 catches the rest of the year, which is not something you say. But then again, like, I don't know what's going on with the NFL this year. Tight ends have been weird in general. I know a lot of people have been like, kind of getting ready to just ban the tight end spot and make it another flex spot, which I would be in support of, obviously. I have a team that has Mark Andrews and Kyle Pitts on it. So I would love that to change to a flex spot, but Yeah, this has been really disappointing for a guy that is supposed to be, like you said, a generational prospect at tight end. So, with that being said, what's your second takeaway from the NFL?
Yeah, so we both went with a younger guy in the league, except mine's more on the positive side. To me, Seattle need to lean on Kenneth Walker in this offense if they want to be successful this season. And I think a lot of it showed last night. Obviously, this season he's only played in 2 games. He just came back dealing with an oblique injury. But wow, was he electric last night. I made a joke about it in the TikTok I posted that he cost me my fantasy game. He did. He dropped 33 and I lost by 12 points. But in Monday Night Football, he rushed for 80 yards and had 3 total touchdowns. He also had 4 catches for 36 yards. And Seattle's 3-1 right now. Obviously, they just lost to Detroit, but he had that perfect balance in that offense. When he was injured, it was really reliant on Geno Smith to make plays to his receivers. But having Kenneth Walker in, I mean, we forget how explosive he is when he's gone. Seattle easily could be a 2-2 team right now, 1-3 if it wasn't for Geno. But if you factor in how good of a running back Kenneth Walker is in this system, Seattle definitely could take the NFC West this year. I mean, especially with San Francisco's play right now, San Francisco has not looked good.
No.
And, they talk about that good young Seattle secondary, but if you look at it, to me, especially now that he's back, if he can stay healthy for the remainder of the season, I think Kenneth Walker needs to be the centerpiece of this offense. If you can open up the field to allow your receivers to get open downfield because of how good he's running, you can factor in your play action passes more effectively. You can look for those deep balls every now and then because you're going to have to bite in covering, the run game or Kenneth Walker in the pass game. And even Zach Charbonnet can get open in the pass game. But to be honest, the running backs need to be a bigger factor in the Seattle offense this year. I think Kenneth Walker proved that even though they lost. And I think if they want to win the NFC West, which they have a chance this season, it's got to be because they use Kenneth Walker more.
Yeah, and we don't give out fantasy advice usually, but I have fantasy advice for you. Start Kenneth Walker if you weren't going to. They're playing the Giants defense. He's about to run for 150 yards. Like that's kind of how I feel. He was untackleable last night. He broke, I don't know, 15 plus tackles. It was ridiculous. There was a play where he got flipped once and then got flipped twice and he never touched the ground. So that was ridiculous. And I agree with you. I think the play action pass for Geno Smith off of the Kenneth Walker run game will. I mean, could you imagine DK Metcalf goes to block you and then runs like a post route off of a play action? That's unguardable. Unguardable. If you have to defend for Kenneth Walker, who's getting like 20, 25 carries a game. They're in a great spot right now, Seattle. And I think last night, even though the Lions got the best of them, the Lions were on one. Let's just be honest. That was probably the best game of their year. At the end of the season, we'll look back at that and probably go, that was their best offensive performance. But Seattle, they competed. They were able to score with them. They just didn't score enough. That's kind of what it was. They were trading touchdowns. So, yeah, that's great. That's great. I think Kenneth Walker is going to be top, definitely.
Yeah, and it was a game. Seattle outgained Detroit. They had 516 total yards of offense, where Detroit only had 389, which, you got to say something about the defense being played. But yeah, no, offensively, Seattle looked great. They just couldn't get in the end zone, which was unfortunate. But yeah, definitely some interesting games to look at from NFL this week. Moving on now into the college stock market, players, teams, conferences rising and falling. As we get closer and closer to the playoffs each week, we get more and more stock being taken and dropped. So to start off, give me your two positives. Who are your stock ups of this week?
All right, so my first one is more of a concept than an actual player, and that is the 2026 NFL Draft wide receiver prospects. We got a peek into the future, and it is glorious this weekend. Oh my goodness, Ryan Williams against Georgia, absolutely ridiculous. He won the game winner. That play was contorting your body to go like this, and then that disgusting spin move. He was torching them the entire game. I won't go too far into it, but he was amazing. He had 6 catches, 177 yards and a touchdown, obviously the game winner. And then Jeremiah Smith, underrated performance just because Ohio State was playing Michigan State and they blew him out. But multiple one-handed catches, including one where his face mask is getting grabbed, like right here, he makes that catch. Ridiculous. He's made every single catch. He had one drop in the first game, and everyone was like, oh no, what's going to happen. And then he went off and had like 100 plus yards and 2 touchdowns. But he ended with 83 yards and a touchdown. The future is bright. I'm looking at both of these guys being game wreckers when they get to the NFL, like a Justin Jefferson type impact right away. And they're just freaks of nature. Like Ryan Williams, he's 17 and he's playing and he's balling. And I'm sorry, I'm sorry, Jeremiah Smith, you're 18, but still amazing nonetheless. And true freshman. It's going to be spectacular to watch. So I can't wait for that. And hopefully the Giants aren't bad enough to grab one of them. But if they were to grab one of them and put them right next to Malik Neighbors, that'd be pretty sweet. So I'm going to go with the 2026 wide receiver prospects for my first stock up. And then my second stock up, we've talked about him ad nauseum, and you're going to hear some more here. Ashton Jeanty, running back from Boise State. Andrew had him a couple of weeks ago after the Oregon game. But we need to talk more about how Ashton Jeanty is by far and away the best running back in FBS, and it's not even close. He's got 845 yards rushing, 13 touchdowns. Boise State has 879 passing yards as a team. He's almost outgained their entire passing attack. He's also put up all these numbers against their strongest opponents. His worst game was against Portland State. He only had 127 yards and a touchdown.
And he was
But
set at the half in that game too.
yeah, yeah, which is ridiculous. Like if he played that full game, imagine how many yards he would have gotten. But that is technically his worst game. We saw this. His over under for that game was for the game against Washington State this past Saturday was 179 and a half, and he blew that out of the water. He had 259 yards and 4 touchdowns. He was untackleable, even more untackleable than Kenneth Walker. I mean, he broke 13 tackles on one run, it seemed like. He's running for an astronomical 10.3 yards per carry, which is ridiculous. He's making these games against other opponents that are quality. They also have a lot of quality opponents still left on the schedule. They got UNLV, a team like San Jose State, who's pretty good, and Oregon State as well. And I think if he continues, even if he dips down and starts averaging like, I don't know, 100 yards per game, he should be in New York. 100% he should be in New York, especially if they make that group of five playoff bid. And it is just ridiculous. So, yeah, my two stock ups are Ashton Jeanty, obviously, and then the 2026 wide receiver prospects. Do you have any thoughts before we move on to your stock ups?
Yeah, so a little bit more on Ashton Jeanty before I go into my two stock ups. I kind of did the calculations on my own. If Boise State are to make it into their conference championship game, he's currently averaging 211 rushing yards per game. If he continues to hit his average for the remainder of the 8 regular season games they have left to play and their conference championship game, he will break Barry Sanders' single season rushing yard record, which is a 36-year record. I think it's 2,862 rushing yards off the top of my head. It's something like that. But yeah, he's on pace. If he continues, if he gets 211 rushing yards for the remainder of their games, plus the Mountain West Championship, he'll be at almost 3,000 rushing yards this season, which, yeah, 100% he needs to be in New York for that Heisman Trophy ceremony. I don't care what anybody else says. I think he right now is my favorite for the Heisman. I mean, the fact we're 4 games in and he's almost at 1,000 yards rushing and 13 touchdowns. I mean, most guys in their run game hit that in a season. He's hit it in 4 games. Incredible, and one of the best college football running backs I've ever watched.
And think about how many great ones we've seen, and no one did this to start
Yeah,
season.
exactly. I mean, we've seen some superior college football running backs, and to me, he's up there in my top two.
Yeah.
Yeah, so going into mine, my stock ups for the week. I'll start off. I had Ryan Williams as well. You touched up on it a lot. The kid is 17 years old, and in my opinion, is the best wide receiver in college football right now. If not, maybe behind Teteroa McMillan. The kid went 6 catches, 177 yards, and that clutch touchdown against Georgia. Things that Ryan Williams can't do at the age of 17. He can't drink. He can't vote. He can't legally, do some other things that I'm not going to say on YouTube. But you know what he can do at 17? He can torch some of the best secondaries in football. And I said it in the TikTok I made. He could be a first round, he could be a top 5 pick in this year's draft at 17. I can't even imagine once he's fully developed into the college system, when he's like 19, 20 when he's an upperclassman. He's gotten that freshman 15 on, he's gotten muscle on, he's
Mhm.
really been in that Kalen DeBoer Alabama system. He is going to be a beast. I'm terrified for it. I mean, his ability to catch in traffic and his yards after catch right now at 17 years old is something that I've never seen. Think about it. This kid, I can't even imagine what his highlight tape looked like in high school. If
Yeah.
he's doing it at 17 against some of the best Georgia secondary players who are all probably going to be first round picks, I mean, he's got to be one of the best prospects I've ever watched. So I completely was blown away with him. He's got the clutch gene, getting down with 2 minutes left, you go down a point in a game against Georgia. Most teams get deflated and they just lose. He said, "Nah, deep ball me, I'm scoring."
Yeah.
Incredible. He really, really impressed me. Stock is going high for him. And then my second isn't as hype, but I went with Penn State. And I think they're a team that are seriously an underrated contender out of the Big Ten this year. They're currently 4-0, and they just came off a big 21-7 win at home against number 19 Illinois. But looking at their schedule, they could cakewalk into this Big Ten championship. Their two toughest games left, USC, obviously, hit or miss so far. They look disappointing against Michigan, but USC hasn't been bad. And then obviously the big bad wolf of Ohio State. But Drew Aller really, really has played well these last few weeks. I'm really impressed with how that Penn State offense is moving. USC is definitely a winnable game, and if they can go one loss, I think they're a serious contender for an at-large. I think it's almost locked up as long as they don't lose two games. Tyler Warren, he's been really, really good at tight end lately. Even though I have a personal vendetta against him, he beat me out for all-state punting senior year of
Oh,
high school. But he's been phenomenal at tight end for them. That offense is firing. Their defense has really been shut down all season. Yeah, don't write out Penn State in the playoffs this year. That's my second stock up of the week.
yeah, and it was an impressive win. It was a slug it out game, and you got to be able to win those games if you're going to be in a place like the Big Ten title game and the playoff now that it's expanded. And Tyler Warren, man, he could do it all. I'm sorry, he couldn't let you have anything. Like
No,
really, now he's running the ball, and he's basically a quarterback now too. So, I mean, my Lord, he was impressive. But yeah, Penn State overall, that rushing game and that defense really carried them and got an impressive win against Illinois. So that's definitely, I agree with you there that their stock is definitely going up, especially with a team like Ole Miss losing, who, now they kind of drop out of that at large unless they're able to win out in a tough SEC schedule. So that knocks one team out of their way, and I assume there'll be more to follow. So moving on to my stock downs, I went with Ashton Jeanty in my stock up. Now we're going to go with the guy that we all assumed was going to be the best running back in college football, Ollie Gordon of Oklahoma State. Where the hell is he? Where is he? He hasn't been on the field. And when he has, he hasn't gotten any room. I'm not going to put the blame on him though, because their O line's been really bad. He has had some plays. They tried to stretch it out, kind of get him in the pass game. He looked pretty good against Kansas State, I will say. But it's just not been the season that we had hoped for him. I thought personally he was going to light the world on fire. NCAA EA Sports College Football 25 obviously thought that too, with that such a high rating. But he had 10 carries, 69 yards, so pretty good. But for a guy of his caliber, you expect more. And then just 5 carries and 7 yards for the rest of the game. So sorry, 10 carries, 69 yards on the first two drives of the game, and then only 5 carries and 7 yards for the rest of the game, which is ridiculous, especially when you have your best player. He had 128 yards against South Dakota State in the opening weekend, and he just has now 208 more yards than he did after week one against four FBS opponents, which is not going to get it done. His Heisman Trophy odds, Oklahoma State's playoff odds, unless they win the Big 12 somehow, it's not going to happen. Ollie Gordon, really disappointing to start, but he still has time to bounce it back, and I'm sure he will still get drafted at this point, unless there's something astronomical that happens there. My second stock down is going to be a guy that I've been high on, and I wanted the Giants to have. Still do, even though he had a bad game. Jackson Dart, the QB from Ole Miss. It's his third year in the system. He's looked the most comfortable he has to begin the year. Did not look comfortable on Saturday with that Kentucky defense. He looked real bad. He entered the week with a 79% completion percentage, which was he was first in completion percentage, second in passing yards behind Cam Ward. He also had the third most passing touchdowns in the country, according to ESPN. But Ole Miss got bullied this weekend. They really got bullied by Kentucky. Kentucky kind of had the formula, almost beat Georgia, and then they go into the SIP and just kind of grind it out against Ole Miss and end up beating them. He struggled. He threw for 261, a touchdown, and completed 66% of his passes. I know what you're thinking, like, oh, that's not bad at all. But for a guy that was averaging almost 80% completion percentage, that's a pretty big drop off. He also took 4 sacks, and about three of them were his fault. And he didn't really have much awareness. He was throwing the ball dangerously all day. He was putting it in coverage. He wasn't making great decisions, doing what's best for the team. They ended up dropping that game. Now they're gonna have to bounce back. Let's see. I forget who they play this week, but they're going to Death Valley in 2 weeks to play LSU. So that's a huge game for him, and he's got to show it. They still got to play Alabama. This is a really big kind of bounce back week for him as they go into Death Valley. So I want to see some more from Jackson Dart if he can shake it off. So my two biggest stock downs are Jackson Dart and Ollie Gordon. Who were your stock downs of this week?
Yeah, so my first, I went with an entire conference and I went with the Big 12. And I think it's because realistically, right now, I feel as if they've screwed themselves out of having any teams as an at-large bid. I think the only team that makes it out of the Big 12 now is the conference champion. All of the top teams are splitting against each other. We came into the regular season, Arizona was ranked, Kansas State was ranked, Oklahoma State was ranked, Utah's ranked, and they're all splitting against each other. Arizona loses to Kansas State. Kansas State loses to BYU. Kansas State beats Oklahoma State. Oklahoma State loses to Utah. Utah loses to Arizona.
Yeah.
They're all effectively eliminating themselves. Iowa State's been consistent, but they're not really talked about because they haven't really had anything impressive yet in this season in terms of wins. Their biggest win is arguably against Iowa in the Cyhawk game. But right now, if the season were to end in the Big 12, the conference championship would be BYU versus Colorado. And to me, I mean, it's inexcusable how, you can say all you want about Colorado, but at the end of the day, Colorado has a serious path to the playoffs right now. They have to play Utah and Oklahoma State left as their most difficult games, but with how inconsistent the top teams in the Big 12 are playing, there's a chance we could see Colorado come out of the Big 12 as the champion in the playoffs, which is bananas to me because BYU, while they look like the team to do it right now, they're top of the Big 12. They got to go and play the Holy War at Rice-Eccles Stadium, which to me is one of the hardest places to play in a rivalry game. As a fan of Oregon, I've seen it plenty of times we've gone to Rice-Eccles and walked out losing. You don't want to play there. And I could see Utah knocking them off, and I could see all these teams in the Big 12 being 2-loss, 3-loss, splitting each other. And it's bananas. There isn't one team that wants to be the powerhouse in that conference. And like I said, I'm not the biggest fan of Colorado. They have like a genuine good chance to make the playoffs this year. And when you look at a conference, you want to have at least one powerhouse team, your staple of your conference. And I don't see one right now. It's really disappointing. They got to figure out their identity if they want to be taken seriously in this Power Four era. Because to me, look at the ACC. That's another team that's considered the bottom of the Power Four. They have their staple teams. You have your Miami, you have your Clemson, your two top level teams in your conference. Who is that right now in the Big 12?
No one.
Exactly. I would have liked to have said Kansas State, but then they go and lose to BYU. Yes, BYU is hard to play at. Then you go, okay, Utah, no Cam Rising, but Isaac Wilson's looked good. No, you're going to lose to Arizona. Okay, they got Tetairoa McMillan and Noah Fifita, but they lost to Kansas State. Nobody wants it. So Colorado might be the staple team of the Big 12, which makes no sense. I could go and ramble on about this for 3 more hours. It's crazy. I've got papers pinned up against my wall and a crazy roadmap, like a conspiracy theory. I don't know. My stock is down on the Big 12 right now. And then, for sake of time, I'll move on to my next one. I went with Louisville. And I highlighted the match against Notre Dame as my game to watch outside of Bama, Georgia, obviously, because I really wanted to see, Notre Dame's back was against the wall as a potential elimination game for them. And Louisville, they're kind of a sneaky team in the pack in the ACC. We don't really know, okay, they got Clemson, they got Miami, but Louisville's a top 15 team. Tyler Shucks looked pretty good so far to start the season, former Oregon guy, you know. But what did we get to see out of them? They lose 31-24, and it was a disappointing game out of them. And to me, it was because they couldn't keep the ball on offense. They had too many turnovers on offense. They had three turnovers. All three turnovers led to points for Notre Dame. They gave up 17 points off of turnovers. And if you want to talk about potentially being a playoff team, they were on that bubble for me. If they beat Notre Dame, they're serious in the ACC. 17 points off turnovers and you lose by seven. You can't do that. If you want to be a contender and you want to win your conference championship, you can't turn the ball over and you can't let them score off of those turnovers. And they couldn't do either. They kept turning the ball over and they kept letting them score. Really made me disappointed in them. Tyler Shuck didn't have as good of a game as I wanted. Louisville, to me, stopped down.
Yeah, and they're working uphill now. They got to go undefeated and win the ACC. In my mind, I don't think their schedule. I'm blanking on who they got down the road, but they play either Clemson or Miami. One of the two teams. I don't think both. But you got to probably beat both of those teams at some point in the year. So yeah, you're right. Like Notre Dame's good and all, but I would put them below a Miami team, and I'd honestly right now put Clemson above Notre Dame in terms of how good they are playing. So yeah, you got to win that game and 17 points. I bet on them this week. That was so disappointing. That was disappointing, and I really thought they had a chance, but as you said, they didn't really show up to the task there, and Notre Dame ends up getting the W.
Yeah, and it's weird because it's like with this expanded playoff, it almost feels like teams don't care as much. Feels like teams are willing to take a loss. Like to me, they're not playing with that do or die on outside of the SEC. The SEC is the only conference so
You were
far
done.
that I've seen every game be a do or die game. I mean, think about it. Most teams now, if Bama, Georgia was in any other conference, I don't think Bama plays with that much power, poised to try to get back in and get that immediate touchdown back. I don't think Georgia claws their way back from a 30-point deficit if they're like an SEC, not an SEC school. And to me, it's again, kind of goes back to the Big 12's identities. They don't really care as much. If you're in the SEC right now, you have to win every single game. You like think about it. Think about Missouri. Think about now, obviously, Ole Miss, who just lost. Think about, Tennessee. Any of these teams, Georgia now, too. All of them, if they lose one more, they might just eliminate everybody. And so it's dog eat dog out here. And it feels like some of these teams that aren't, necessarily the powerhouse, but could be a contender don't care as much. And it's disappointing. It's weird because there's just been more random upsets. And I think it's a good thing because I love an upset, but it doesn't feel like we have that typical stature where the top teams are undefeated until like the last 3 weeks of the regular season, and then it's okay, survival of the fittest now. It's like that from the jump.
Yeah, and I kind of like that just instantly made me think of Brandon Whedon's Oklahoma State team going into that last week against Iowa State, a team that was like 3-8, and Iowa State gets the upset, knocks them out of the BCS national championship game. I want to see something like that. Yeah, I agree with you. There has been more upsets. There hasn't been as much urgency, but I think we'll see. I think it's going to get picked up because if you notice, like you said, like Louisville probably eliminated now. I think we need to see the rankings. I want to see what the committee is thinking before, and I think that'll wake teams up and be like, "Holy crap, it's right here. We got to go take it. We got to win the rest of our games." Something like that. So yeah, it'll be an adjustment. I think it's an adjustment more than anything.
Definitely, and I agree. I really want to see some early, committee polls and placements. Obviously, we won't get to until like week 10,
Yeah.
which it's fun once they come out. I love the committee, those top 25 reveal parties. But yeah, no, I think teams will start to get that urgency once they kind of have that belief in themselves from the polls.
Yeah. And that'll be the say all end all or the end all say all or whatever. Excuse my botched kind of comment there. But moving on to who impressed this week from the NFL. I'll pass it to you first, Andrew. Which team impressed you the most this past weekend?
Yeah, I went with the Indianapolis Colts, a team that we've kind of been harsh on through the first, few weeks of the season. Anthony Richardson didn't look good in the first 3 weeks. Jonathan Taylor hadn't done much. Their defense was kind of selling out. Josh Downs was battling injuries and then just didn't do much. But they had a really nice win, 27-24 over the Pittsburgh Steelers, which is my lock of the week from the NFL. I took them -1.5. I was wrong on that game. But Anthony Richardson went down with a hip like contusion. They say he's day to day now, so it's nothing to worry about. Joe Flacco came in and had himself a day. He carried that offense, and they looked good. I'll flat out be honest. I looked at that matchup and I said, Pittsburgh's defense is the number one scoring defense. They've been one of just the overall top defenses in the NFL. This offense hasn't looked great. They're going to have a field day, and that was not the case. Colts didn't care. They were at home. They said Pittsburgh, who came in, they got the job done, and it turns the season around. That's a great in division win that, down the line when we're looking at wild card spots could potentially be a tiebreaker because Pittsburgh will be a top team. So if they're, let's say they're, 9-7, 9-8, whatever, last spot in the wild card, having a win over, let's say, 12 win Pittsburgh, that's going to put you above other teams. And I think it's really big. But they got to turn it around now. They need this consistency now more than ever if they want to actually try to make a push. But overall, really impressed me this week. Hopefully, we'll see some better consistency with Anthony Richardson next week if he's healthy. But what about you? Who was your biggest impress of the week?
So I've been on this team ever since they beat my team, because that's just what I got to do. But the Minnesota Vikings, the Minnesota Vikings came out of nowhere. They're still undefeated. They're a contender for sure now. And it wasn't so much that they got out to a 28-0 lead against Green Bay, a team that they notoriously can't beat. But it's the fact that they gave up 22 unanswered to the Packers and still won. I kind of talked about that with the Lions, being able to choke and then recover from your choke and still finish. That is impressive. That's what you do in the playoffs. That happens all the time. You don't want to be like the Falcons in the Super Bowl. You don't want to do that. And if you can bounce back from playing poorly and the other team surging, that means a lot. But shout out to Brian Flores. He's doing a great job as the DC. Jordan Love looked bewildered at times. He looked a little confused. Yes, it was his first game back, but 3 picks is not how you want to start. He did pick it up, obviously, in the second half, especially the fourth quarter. But great, great scheme. They had it down pat, and the Minnesota Vikings are great, and I cannot wait for that first matchup, Lions Vikings. That's going to be a great game. I cannot wait for that one. I will, I will be watching every second of that. But then this is a good test this weekend. So they go across the pond. They go play the Jets in London. Huge game for the Jets. Must win, I would say. For the Vikings, not a must win, but it would be a stamp. It would be a huge stamp for this team, especially against Aaron Rodgers, a team that or a player that has dominated them in historically. So that would be a pretty big win for them. So yeah, the Vikings were my most impressive team, and I cannot wait to watch them the rest of the season. They look like they're playing free on both sides of the ball, and it looks awesome. Sam Darnold is an MVP frontrunner right now, and I did not think we were going to be saying that, but for sure he is right now. So yeah.
Could you imagine 6 years ago telling Jets fans that Sam Darnold would be an MVP contender in 2024, but for the Vikings?
Yeah.
I mean, it's crazy the world we live in. I can't believe the Vikings are as good as they are. I got that one completely wrong
Yeah,
in my
me too.
predictions. But looking at it now, disappointing team. Who'd you have?
The Philadelphia Eagles, and I'm going to say this with a grin on my face. You see this? I hate watch the Eagles every weekend. Sorry, Eagles fans. But they looked bad. Yes, there were injuries. Devonta Smith was out with the concussion. AJ Brown was out the hamstring. But even still, Saquon carried their offense, which is what he did in New York, so he's used to that. But Jalen Hurts does not look good. Has not looked good this year. He has a turnover in I believe, every single one of his last 8 games, which is very concerning. Tampa Bay scored the first 24 points of the game. CJ Gardner Johnson talking trash before the game, gets burnt like toast. Mike Evans just, sunned him the entire game. Chris Godwin looked great as well. They were rolling. Baker was really slicing them up. And it makes me Happy, quite frankly. But Paris Campbell was the leading receiver for the Eagles this weekend. He caught four passes for 17 yards. He was the leading receiver. The receiver, like literal wide receiver. I want to make that clear. Goddard had a pretty good game, and so did Saquon. But Jalen Hurts threw for 158 yards. He posted an average of 3.2 yards per attempt, which is not what you want to see from a guy that was an MVP candidate not just 2 years ago. Um, you know, the second worst of Bo Nix, but Bo Nix was getting poured on and he was playing against a better defense. Bo Nix had 2.4 yards, but they also got the win, so it doesn't really matter. The defense has been terrible, as I said. They really got to fix that, especially with the Commanders coming up. The Eagles have played so poorly that I actually think the Giants have a chance in Saquon's reunion game back in MetLife in Week 7. So, if that's not a message, I don't know what is, Philly fans, that I actually have hope for that game. But yeah, the Eagles are my most disappointing team. Who disappointed you the most, or do you want to comment on?
Yeah, I
The
just had one question. How do you think they feel about that Jahan Dotson trade? Because he has done nothing through the first four games. I think his best stat line is 2 catches for 6 yards. So that's my first question. What do you think they do with that?
So I think the Commanders knew what they were doing. To be quite honest with you, they didn't need him, and the Eagles didn't need him either, and they kind of wasted that draft pick. You'd figure Devonta Smith out, AJ Brown out, Jahan Dotson's got to be wide receiver one, right? He's not getting open. He's not getting separation. If you watch, he got locked down the entire game. That's why he was throwing to Paris Campbell and Dallas Goedert. So while it wasn't a big spend to get a guy like Jahan Dotson, someone that probably wouldn't have made the roster in Washington, you expect more. So I think that kind of affects it. They're very like I don't want to say one dimensional because they have so many stars, but they kind of are. Like if it's not going to Devonta Smith, well, I'm gonna sit here and say if it's not going to Devonta Smith and AJ Brown and Dallas Goedert and Saquon Barkley, but if you were able to lock two of those four guys down, the Eagles got nothing. They really don't, and their defense has not been good, and that doesn't help. But Jalen Hurts has yet to show me this year or since really the Super Bowl that he deserves to be put in that upper echelon. Like he needs to earn that contract still, and it starts with getting a guy like Jahan Dotson, someone that can make people miss in the open field the ball. So we'll see. I'm not really. I assume Devonta Smith will be back next week, but I also assume that AJ Brown will be out. So we'll see if Jahan gets involved then. But they need to bounce back fast. They definitely need to bounce back fast. So yeah.
Definitely. And then my last question before I'll move on to my most disappointing team. I think it was a struggle on all parts of the field, all sides of the ball, because even special teams, they struggled against Tampa Bay. I mean, there was the gunner pushing, a punt guy for
Yeah.
the Buccaneers into Cooper DeJean that caused the muff punt. So do you think the struggles that the Eagles have seen this season has been on the coaching staff more and the way that they prep and they scheme? Or do you think it's mainly because it's an oversaturation in talent and they don't really have that cohesiveness yet?
So I'm gonna say a little bit of both, but 100%. It's Nick Sirianni. I love him because I know that the Eagles will never win anything meaningful, like a Super Bowl, perhaps, with him as the coach. I hope he gets extended there 100 years. But he has shown time and time again. Yeah, they play great in the Super Bowl, but it's those little things, like I said with Robert Saleh, like it's the little things. As a head coach during the game, you don't really control much. You control the timeouts, you control the challenges, and you control the decisions during the game. And he's not putting the personnel out there. He hasn't shown me that he has talent as a head coach. Like I said a couple of shows ago, I think when they lost in week two, I was like, yeah, the O coordinator and the D coordinator when they made the Super Bowl, Jonathan Gannon and Shane Steichen carried their team, and I'm still seeing that. I still see that since he doesn't have two elite coordinators, although Kellen Moore is very good OC. Um, you know, it shows. It shows a lot. And so I will say that most of it could be put on Sirianni, but you still got to execute. There's no excuse. That this should have been a competitive game at the very least. I know it's Tampa Bay. It wasn't that hostile. And the Bucks are like they just got blown out by the Broncos the week before. And obviously it's the NFL, so any given Sunday type deal. But yeah, you gotta get up for a game like this, especially when they crushed you in the playoffs last year. So this has got to be a game that you got to get up for, and Sirianni didn't do that. So I would say both, but mostly Sirianni if I had to choose one.
Definitely. I think the Eagles have a lot of, hard conversations to have down the road. I don't think Sirianni stays for that much longer because I agree they won't win anything without him. But I guess I'll finally get into my biggest disappointment of the week. I'll keep it quick because we've talked about it relatively decent amount of time throughout the show, but I went with the Jets. The weather was awful, but so was the Jets offense. They lose 10-9 to the Denver Broncos, where the defense, like you said, held Knicks to 60 passing yards and the one touchdown to Cortland Sutton, which won them the game. But, there's no excuse for this loss. Like I said, the defense played phenomenally. Rodgers had about a 50% completion rating, threw for 225 yards, and all you can do is kick 3 field goals. And yes, obviously they had the missed field goal at the end. You can bat your eyes at the kicker, which is a bad cop out to me because you should never put your kicker into a situation to win or lose you the game. You already lose if you have to go into that situation. But yeah, like you said, there's a lot of disconnect between Saleh and Rodgers. Garrett Wilson just doesn't get the ball. It makes no sense to me. Yeah, but I mean, for a receiver room of, Garrett Wilson, Malachi Corley, Mike Williams, Alan Lazard, and then you have a running back room of Breece Hall and Braylon Allen, you should be able to run the ball. And it feels like we see this almost every year. There's one typical game. Sometimes it's midway through the season, but this year we got it early, where there's just a typhoon in the Meadowlands. And
Yeah.
for some reason, the Jets will win a game or lose a game like this. Last year, it was the Texans, if I'm not mistaken.
Oh, the Giants game was just like it too.
Exactly. There's always one game a year where the Jets can't play in the rain. It's a home game. They get poured on and they score 6 to 12 points. And it's really disappointing. It's become a common occurrence, but your team is too good to be losing 10-9. I'm a big Bo Nix guy. He didn't play great, but that's just because it's the Broncos against a stout secondary. But I mean, you got to figure it out, guys. Like, this is not a game where you instill any confidence in your fans. And yeah, I mean, Bo Nix and the Denver Broncos should not have been in that game, and they got away with the win. I mean, you got the ball, the final drive of the game at almost midfield due to the missed field goal on the other side. You have 2 minutes or so left. You just got to march down. You win the game easy, and you can't. They didn't have a productive drive, and it's a long field goal that they happened to miss from Zerline, and it's frustrating. If you're a Jets fan, I can understand your frustration as long as you're not cocky about it. But yeah, the trouble in paradise. If you're a Jets fan,
We're looking
I was
at
really
you.
just, huh?
We're looking at you, Anthony
Yeah,
Lembo.
exactly. Telling Tyler to talk to a wall and then losing the game.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, I mean they haven't proven anything yet, and I can't talk. I know my Raiders team sucks. Don't get me wrong. I'm humble about that. I know we're terrible. That's why I don't talk trash. But yeah, have a little bit if you're a Jets fan, a little bit of humble pie. You still got to earn it. Nobody cares until you earn it. And yeah, they disappointed me a lot this week.
Yeah, and I forgot when I was went over this, and I just remembered. One more detail before we finish off here. Fourth and goal from the 1 yard line. Aaron Rodgers goes into the hardest count I've ever heard from the 1 yard line. You get a penalty there, yeah. Well, actually, I don't even know if it would be a first down. It would just be half the distance, and then you'd replay the play. False start. John Simpson backs him up to the 6. They kick the field goal. Whose fault is that? It's not Saleh's. It's not Simpson's. Just run the play, Aaron. But that's just it. They'll figure that out. I have no doubt in my mind that they still end up with double-digit wins until they prove otherwise. But yeah, that was ugly. That was
Yeah,
definitely ugly.
for sure. And I agree. Though they're a good team. They're great on paper for a reason. They just got to figure it out. But like I said, have that humility until you're there. It's still the Jets. So Uh, difficult road ahead for them, but we'll see what happens. If there's anything else you want to add, or
No, I'm all set.
all right, so this has been another episode of our NFL podcast from Sideline Signal. I'm Andrew, as always, joined by Tyler. Thank you for joining me. If you like content like this, make sure to like and subscribe. Comment if you have any questions or anything you want to talk about. We love reading the comments. Make sure to follow us on TikTok. We post a lot of content on there. Same TikTok is at Sideline Signal. But other than that, this has been another great episode. I really enjoyed the conversation. I think we covered a lot of great ground. We'll have another video out later this week where we, preview some of the college football and NFL games coming up this weekend. But from us, thank you for listening and have a great rest of your day.